Reclaiming Timeless Ways, another episode underway. Mike Traster, Simon Fuller, welcome. And Mike, today sort of I don't even know what to say. Are we a third or are we midway? We don't even really know how far we are through the series because who knows where this will take us. But we wanted to do a rewind, if you will.
Exactly.
And sort of recircle back to the why, the how, and what we've done so far, Mike.
Right. So when we met, it was because I found a person on the ground, found the gal that owned it. Turned out she worked here, and then I called up the station to joke with her about how come you haven't lost your purse again.
Right.
And then she wasn't here. We talked, and we got into this long conversation, had a huge lunch, and basically one of the things that we kept circling around from 100 different perspectives was to reduce suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like we were talking a minute ago offline, you don't have to be in perfect alignment with somebody to understand that they have a passion to reduce suffering.
Right.
Like for me, maybe Gandhi was too much of a pacifist, although he wasn't a complete pacifist.
Right.
But he was definitely passionate about reducing suffering. Martin Luther King, same thing,
Right.
And other people who we have come to admire in different ways. So they all had that thing in common. We see certain things that are just spontaneously tragic or intentionally unjust, and we want to somehow make it a little better,
Right. And the same could be said for you or I, Mike. As we're in these shows, you don't have to like either of us completely or know us completely.
No.
But the idea is if you can take something away good, and we hope that these shows help reduce suffering in different ways, that you might be able to apply that in life.
So one of the things that I would suggest strongly to the viewer is that if you're looking for 30 or 40 minutes of continuity and that this whole immense message has to all be bonded together to have some value, you're going to miss a lot of the things that we're saying. There might be literally 10 sentences that are gold in each program.
Sure.
And that's so what I would ask you to do is watch for your sentence.
Right. And that's a good line. Watch for your sentence, Mike, because everybody is going to receive this, and some messages mean nothing to you right now, might later, but that same sentence could mean the world to somebody else. Watch for your sentence. I like that.
Yeah, okay. It's one of those moments again, keeps coming up. So originally we talked about the fact that we were intentionally created with unique abilities, natures, and purposes.
Right.
And am I saying it exactly the way I did? No. And I probably never will, which is fine. So what we wanted to do was do a very brief synopsis of each of the 9 programs we've done so far and try to maybe focus on one thing or two briefly, but meaningfully. So number 1, Reclaiming, episode 1, we were created with intelligence and purpose. Honest communication was something like that we saw with actor Jimmy Stewart. He was down to earth, and we miss that. And we're angry about our culture, almost universally to some extent. We're in a state of anger, disgust, or despair where we've just given up. And it's because that genuineness is gone, and instead of it, it's like, how you doing? Which is garbage.
Right.
It's not an honest hello. It's like, you're in my way. I want to get that can of soup.
Right.
So, and we need to be done with that. So one of the things we talked about was suicide prevention and seeing things seeing people's posture, their tone of voice, their body language, phrases that come out of them, and also if they're unapproachable. Right. A lot of times powerful people become unapproachable to hide their depression. They're hopeless in some way. It might be something that's drawn on them for years or decades. And it's okay to approach somebody and say, we're not the best of friends, but I care about you, and you look like, you don't say to somebody you look like crap, but you can certainly say, you look like you're carrying a burden.
Right.
You really, really look, and I know every one of us gets in that state. What is going on?
Right.
Take a minute, talk to me, right? And then if they blow you off firmly, you know, maybe you can say, well, I'm concerned, but okay, I'm going to respect your boundary, but I am concerned about you, you know?
And know I'm here for you. And,
right.
And I've often, through something that's continued to rear its head in these shows, is a comment that you made, because I don't know if I want to say struggled or questioned sometimes how do you approach somebody, and right. You've often said, be vulnerable yourself. And I always liked that line, because if you go in and under that same circumstance, you look like you're carrying a burden. Oh, no, I'm good, Mike. I'm good.
Yeah.
And you say, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I hope everything's going okay. Yeah, you know, just the other day I blank. Right. And you can say something that maybe is going on in your world, and oftentimes that vulnerability might give a second chance at them opening up with some vulnerability if you're, you know, if they're just trying to dismiss you. And I always thought that was a unique way to think, okay, how do I break through, Mike? If I know there's something going on, I don't know how to get there. Sure. That was a good tactic.
Right.
I liked.
I think I understand how you basically seem to be feeling, because I have had a similar experience. Here's what I did that helped a little bit. Didn't make it perfect, because if you do the perfect dance, it's garbage. You know, it's just not real. So we talked a little bit about model communities, and I think maybe, you know, how we greet each other is one thing, but also one thing and this is really for the bureaucrats, and that is adult education is really important, because it teaches people to be more independent when they don't have much resources, so they're not getting ripped off. And also they get a chance to rub elbows with other people instead of being isolated, like if somebody's husband or wife died and that was their whole world. Now they have nothing. And so this way they're reconnected. And I don't think that's a difficult thing. You know, I think there's 20 reasons why it can't happen, and I bet you there's 50 why it can.
Right.
You know, so bureaucrats do that better.
Right.
You know, seriously.
It's true.
So number 2, communication. We talked about one of the poison phrases in communication, that is, it's an accusation, and it's just a big broad brush lie, and that is, you always or you never.
Right.
You never take the garbage out. Come on.
Right.
Or you never cook a decent meal. You know,
and it's funny, after we did that show, Mike, I caught myself accidentally. Sometimes we say it as a figure of speech, but words have power.
Oh, they do.
And you've got to think about what you're saying and how you're saying it.
Yeah.
Because they can be very hurtful or destructive to somebody else.
You're diminishing everything that person has done.
Right.
When you do that, you know.
And that's not fair.
It's not fair at all. It's a hell of a lever. I mean, if you want control, it's a weapon. Yeah. It's what it is. It's not a tool, it's a weapon.
Right.
But if you have a relationship that has value with a person who you supposedly value, you don't use weapons, you use tools.
Right.
You know, so then we talked about the letter to some degree in that one, and the letter is, you're told a falsehood, you're communicated like you're not smart, you're not strong, you'll never amount to anything, and you hear it, you're just like Uncle John, you know, he was an idiot too, and so you hear this, or maybe you hear him saying it off to the side, you know, to dismiss somebody, or she's always going to be ugly. How do you know? You know, but also, is that the whole essence of that person's value, right? So that's the letter. It's got falsehoods in it. We carry it metaphorically in our shirt pocket, and we always pick it up and read it, and that adds to our despair. So one of the great things to do in life is to take the letter out and read it and say to ourselves, is this stuff true?
Right.
Or is it crap? And if it's crap, you know, if you have to take that letter out 1,000 times and throw it out before it really becomes gone, do it 1,001 times. Right. You know? So that was like number 2.
And it's amazing how many people carry some form of a lie based on what other people think of them versus what they think of themselves. Right. And boy, you want to talk about stifling human creativity and ability and stopping them from becoming their best them.
Right. Look,
that's again very unfair.
Yeah, we talked for a few minutes about the guy I knew growing up who was a very hard-working man, short stature, horrifically uneducated, and everybody was convinced that he was short, which he was, strong, which he was, and stupid as dog crap. Turned out he went back to school with little tiny bits and pieces and earned a PhD in mathematics. And all the people who were looking down their nose at him were honestly intellectual midgets compared to him.
Right.
They were.
And I bet you he never, ever prejudged or said that to them.
No, he never did.
Even though he could.
He could have. And I'm sure he picked up on it. He was a smart guy.
Right, obviously.
Oh, boy. So, let's see. We talked about limits. So, like, you know, you're a little kid and you can barely pick up this. And then a year later, you go to pick it up and it just comes off like, oh, wow, I changed a lot. And then 5 years and 10 years go by and you can do something you didn't imagine once that you could ever do. And maybe in an emergency you're much stronger than you realize, and it's somewhat maybe adrenaline, but maybe you're just a lot stronger, period, but you still have limits.
Right.
And the thing is to be able to say to ourselves and one another, yeah, you know, I can do this, or I used to be able to, but I also have limits because of my structure, my genetics, my age, an accident, and that's okay.
Right.
It's okay to have limits. I have a limited amount of time, money, energy, physical strength, and I have to like budget my abilities. Right? And that's not shameful. And if anybody tells you it is, that's their problem. Right? And you can disagree with them, you should disagree with them firmly. You don't have to be, you know, like in a rage, but you don't have to accept that. It's garbage, more garbage. So I guess that's you know, just a little touch of what we did on that. So we're up to number 4. Pillars.
Yeah.
Talked about pillars, and pillars are like if you imagine a building and it's built on these big cylindrical cement pillars, right? And so you say to yourself, in a business or in life, in study, in a marriage, in a friendship, what are the fundamental pillars that you need for that to survive?
Right. To stay structurally sound.
Right.
To not collapse.
Right. So like in a marriage, you know, it would be most important to be in agreement on how people use money and time and energy.
Yeah, a lot of trust barriers, a lot of understanding of what one another, the expectations of one another, and that comes in many forms. But when one of those pillars is weakened,
right?
You know, that was sort of the focus of that point. What happens, Mike? You know, it might hold up for a little while, but then guess what? The rest of the load is being held by the remaining pillars, and that structure was made to have, let's say it was 10 pillars. When one goes down, now that weight's divided by 9. And what have you done to the rest of the 9? Strained them.
So you're holding 10% of the building up by air.
Right.
And so the building eventually starts, whatever the building is, starts to tip into that empty space. You know, it could be drug abuse, it could be gambling, right? Or addictive spending, whatever dysfunctional thing is there, or simply the absence of something like your body. You know, you could say your body has pillars, like you need food, you need water, you need exercise, you need rest, and you need to do those things in balance.
Right.
And if you don't, that's going to be one of those places where there's air, where there should have been a pillar, and then that's where your body will collapse. So one of the things that I want to mention quickly is, let's go to this. Identical twins. If you have 2 identical twins, right, and they live in the same house and they do everything the same, but one reads 3 paragraphs 5 times a day and the other one never reads. In the end of 10 years, like one has read tens of thousands of pages and the other has read goose egg. Nothing. So that tiny little bit of difference is huge. Right? And so one of the things that we were talking about later is the ways that we waste time.
Yeah.
And that if you have 3 minutes a day of wasted time that you recover, right? Like filling the sink up. You don't walk out and just wander around because you're going to have a flooded kitchen.
Right.
So you have 3 minutes. So if you want to practice French vocabulary or pre-algebra or medical terminology or Tai Chi or painting or drawing or whatever it happens to be, in a year, it's a lot of time.
Right.
It's almost 1,100 minutes. And I can't remember how many hours that is, but it's a bunch, 20, 30 hours.
Yeah, and that adds up.
Ooh, boy, and imagine that for 5 or 10 or 15 years. So I mean, you get to actually, or playing a guitar or a banjo, I mean, maybe over 10 years. And people always say the same thing. They say, well, it's ridiculous, or it's going to take too long. Well, 5 years is going to be 5 years. Whether you do something or nothing, it's still going to happen.
Right.
So why not invest some of that completely wasted time
into something you want or you've been thinking about, but it's easy for us to say we're too busy. And I'm not saying we're not busy, Mike.
We are busy.
Yeah, but there are little gaps or opportunities to say, okay, what can I do here? Here's something I want to accomplish. I don't feel I have the time. And I'll tell you what, Mike, anytime you dedicate time into something that interests you or that fulfills you, that strengthens those pillars too.
It does. Of course it does. Yeah, every part of you is nourished.
You're investing in you, yeah.
Right, yeah, sure.
How important is that?
It's super important. So the little bits of things that we do are, they're cumulative. They add up. One of the things we talked about was Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle, and one of the things that was kind of funny about them that people talked about sometimes was that they were the two of the greatest strikeout kings of all time in their day. They struck out more than almost anyone, and that was one of the reasons why they were great, because they were willing to go for it.
Right, every time.
Yeah, every time. And he had this one guy hit 714 home runs, and the other one I think hit 536. But he played crippled for 17 years.
Wow.
He was crippled, He had massive damage to his knee, and he played in spite of that. And he had other issues. He drank, and it was it wasted a lot of what he was. But he kind of cleaned up in the end of his life, which was remarkable. So one of the other things we talked about was what we're attracted to. And a lot of times what we're attracted to is something that unconsciously seems familiar. So we think, I know that. It's almost like I know that person, but it might be something as simple as the tenor of their voice, or the arch of their eyebrow, or how they lean forward. Some trait that's like a real pronounced trait that reminds them unconsciously of somebody they knew. So they're there and they're like, God, it's like I've known you forever. You haven't. And you have to really look at the person and see what their substance is, or you're going to wind up getting trapped in fake familiarity.
Right.
And then pay the price, So that was number 5. And again, each one of these little tidbits is so small, and it's like you can look at them one of two ways. That's ridiculous, or that's meaningless, or I'm going to invest a few minutes and pay attention to that and think about it, see if I can figure out an example. Is there somebody I knew who I thought I knew who I didn't?
Or what I love about what we're doing here, Mike, honestly, and you've probably figured it out watching, is, you started the beginning of the show saying, look for those 10 sentences, because when you watch these shows, there's going to be a lot that maybe are not going to appeal to you. That's because we're filling it with stories, and we're going deeper down the holes and circling back, and we're really breaking down each one of these topics. None of them are is the conciseness. This is that concise show.
Right.
This is the recap show.
Right.
So if any of these you're saying, like you just mentioned, you're saying, gosh, that has some meaning to me for whatever reason.
Right.
Go back and watch the episode attached to this, and you're going to get more depth on that topic, a little more, some more storytelling, some more depth to what we're saying and why we're saying it, and this show perfectly sort of encapsulates what we've been doing and why we've been doing it, Mike.
Right. So I'm going to kind of meld two shows together. I think it was the first one and the sixth one, and it's called the STFU. Shut that up. And it's like the disasters that have happened that we know about, like the sinking of the Titanic, was because everyone was told to shut up.
Yeah.
Right. You will lose your job, and we will make sure that you are ruined in the industry. So 1,200 people drowned, or whatever it was.
Right.
It was horrendous. And, they had like so many screw-ups. 100,000 people a year die because of STFU. Right? 100,000 that the AMA admits to. God knows what the real number is, and how many people are maimed. And the other end of that story, so sometimes it's like you've got two bosses, right? You've got God or your conscience, however you look at things, and then you've got the boss that signs your paycheck. And if they tell you to ignore something that's going to cause a horrific outcome, you're going to cost somebody harm. Significant.
In some capacity, yeah.
Right. You may cause a disaster. Somebody may become crippled or dead, or a number of people. One bad brace on a bridge, and you knew the metallurgy of that brace was no good. Now a bridge collapses, and you shut up because you liked your job. And now there's dead people. Whoa.
And you always said too, Mike, with that, and it's kind of a true and almost a wow moment, because the truth is, the more that you have / indebtedness you have, the more likely, or the hard that you are to be quiet, keep quiet, because you've got more to lose, so to speak. So who are you answering to, that paycheck? And we're not saying, look, risk everything and all the time, everything you do, but if there is something going on that just isn't right, it really stems back to, we should never have to fear losing the job to do what's right, or lose it all. But sometimes you have to really weigh that out and say, gosh, what are the risks here? And maybe I need to step up and say something. It's our duty as citizens, as friends, as neighbors, as humankind, to take care of one another.
When we're passive, we put our most pricelessly loved close relatives at risk, because we directly create an environment that puts people in more harm's way. So someday, 5 or 10 years from now, if I am a coward and I want my job that much, and I know there's 100 reasons why, shut up, but I could contribute to a very bad situation, maybe a bad doctor remaining in practice, or a sloppy mechanic, or whatever it happens to be, So the other one I talked about, number one, was the woman that got hit by the train. And there I was in the train, untrained, basically, 20 years old. I think I was just shy of 21, no medical training, right? This was long before I went to nursing school. And so it's a trolley, so it's got this curved nose, and the echo on the street was deceptive. So she thought the train was further away. It was a common phenomenon. And so she wandered across the tracks thinking the train was way down there, and it was right here. So boom, she's up in the air 15, 20 feet, comes crashing down. Everybody's just standing there gawking, and nobody would touch her. They're all afraid of getting sued. And I'm like, what empty souls. Empty. And I opened her mouth because she wasn't breathing, and her whole mouth was full of dirt. And I scooped the dirt out, and she spontaneously would breathe. And I got hold of the police the next day, and they told me she was at Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in Boston. And I went and I visited her, and she was very banged up human being, maybe going to have a sore neck for the rest of her life, and a headache and some foggy memories, but she was alive, And if I hadn't taken that chance, she would have died, And so sometimes we can do that. Number 7, we talked about body-mind medicine. And the joke I made was the kid saying, somebody said that the head and the body are disconnected, but I don't see that. I don't see heads floating above bodies. They're one, And I mentioned about Carl Simonton, who wrote a book called Getting Well Again, and it was for cancer patients. And he talked about visualization therapy and how visualization, and some people call it the placebo effect. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's more to it. I don't know. Those are 3 really important words to learn to say in life. But what we did see was that the people who practiced the visualization of there being a war between the immune system and the disease cells, that those people live 40% longer than they were expected to if they only did the medical but not the meditation.
Yeah.
Remarkable. So Getting Well Again by Carl Symington. His wife, he passed away sadly, still runs the Symington Center in California, and I'm always happy to mention them because I think they have a brilliant vision. We talked about the kid that saw the monster.
Yeah.
Remember? And so this kid, I guess he's having, he's not completely in touch with reality, or he's having these images when he's just going into sleep. I'm not sure which it was. He's at a psychiatrist. He saw this thing like Taz, just this hideous, terrifying monster with massive claws and teeth, and it was going to kill him. And the doctor said, well, how many times? Once? No. 10 times? No. 100 times? No. Every day for a year? More. And he goes, well, what did you know was going to happen each time? Oh, he was going to kill me, like just shred me and leave me like just a bloody mess in pieces all over the floor. And he says, well, how many times did he bite you severely? Never. How many times did he claw you deeply? Never. Did he ever bite you? No. Did he ever claw you? No. Did he ever touch you? No. Oh.
Right.
And then he just was quiet, and he let the kid dwell on that.
Really digest that.
Right. Like, I didn't experience knowing that this was I knew what the outcome was going to be, Like if I said to myself 1,000 times, I know a train is going to come through that wall and run me over. And somebody said to me, well, how many times did it happen? Right? Similar,
Right.
This great irresistible destructive force, and it never happened. Oh, does that tell you something about the legitimacy of your thought,
right,
of your imagery, right? It's an image. Does that mean it was real? Right. So that was in 7, I believe. Number 8, we talked about neurolinguistic programming, which is how we speak to ourselves. And it's just incredibly important. We talked about a friend of mine whose daughter had died, and every Thanksgiving she had this crisis because it happened on Thanksgiving. Right. And it was an outrageous medical malpractice. It was inexcusable, and I listened to her, and it was a horrible story. And I asked her, I said, are you aware of the fact that although you see her suffering, you feel her suffering, you hear her suffering, right, that it's 100% 3D real in your mind, that it's not happening again.
Right.
And it's like you're not on the edge of a precipice about to fall in. It's just this intense memory that you're recalling very efficiently, but it's not happening again. So the meaning of the day is different than what you are treating it as having.
Right.
So that was a lot of what we talked about. Number 8. 9, we talked about addiction.
Yeah.
Right? And
there are many forms.
Oh boy. So smoking. And, I had a friend confront me once, 38, almost 39 years ago, and say, that cigarette you're smoking is a suicidal behavior. And I was enraged, but I didn't act on it, because I knew he was my friend. And I stopped and looked in the mirror and I said, "You are a drug addict." And that was the beginning of figuring out how to slowly reduce my intake every 3 or 4 days. I cut back a cup, 1 or 2. And over 6 weeks or so, I stopped. I still want one.
Yeah.
38 plus years later, I still want, it's an addiction. I didn't use the word quit, I used the word stop. And the reason why is because when you say you quit, it implies that it's not difficult, or it's not a challenge. So drugs, narcissism, gambling, alcohol, perfection, sexual behaviors of various kinds, plastic surgery, credit,
Right, shopping and spending, and
Right.
in most cases you're trying to, or imagining you're filling some sort of a void.
Right.
Oftentimes I think that's why it's being used. It's
Right.
giving you some sort of instant satisfaction, but typically on the back end, the harm it's creating that you're not focused on, it's an incredible amount, and can ruin friendships and relationships and careers and your life, really, Mike.
Yeah, we had a family member who used to go in the bar and buy everybody around, and it destroyed his family. He was a drunk. And violent too, and I think the two fed into each other.
Sure.
And it's shameful. So number 10, exercise. So 10 we haven't done, right? But
I think you're right. I think this is sort of the tease into the next one and slash the recap of the first.
Yeah.
Every good sitcom has a review show or let's 100th episode special or what have you. This is the 10th episode.
Time?
We're actually right about that 30-minute mark and closing in nicely, but so don't give away everything in the next one. But you can tease, Mike.
Yeah, I can tease. So some of the future episodes, and this one we may do today, better community, maybe more focus on that. Different things about exercise. Not that I'm claiming to be an exercise physiologist. Non-traditional medicine, Tai Chi and yoga. So all those things I think are things of value, that we can talk about. If you like, we can cut this one a little shorter than usual, or is there some synopsis that you want to?
Yeah, no, I would.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would say in closing, Mike, honestly, no, I think you did a perfect job. Appreciate it. I know we can't see it, but I'm sure there's some rounds of applauses out there. Just a real nice way, though, to dial back in and say, well, what have we done? First off, and I'm a guy who likes to know why.
Right.
And I think you answered that well at the beginning of the show. And again, it's to try to reduce suffering, to help you, to give you a nugget, a tool, if you will, to help yourself and or others around you. And so this synopsis gave you a glimpse as to what happened in each of the previous shows, if you haven't seen the others, or if you need to circle back and watch one, because maybe one of them has more meaning today and it didn't a month, 6 months, a year ago.
Right.
And Mike, so we really just answered the why and what we're doing, and moving forward, we're going to continue more of the same. It's little nuggets, tools to help people be better, and ultimately, the conclusion or the desire is that, I do something, you do something. That's just 2 people.
Right.
But if we each impact another person, now that's 4.
Right.
And now if each of those impact, that's 8. And then 16, 32, 64, you do the math and the multiplication of people doing these types of things for themselves and one another collectively makes a better place for all of us in our future.
There's an image that I had earlier in the program, and it was an avalanche. And they say there's places like in the Alps, maybe other places, where you don't shout after a snow, because that vibration in the air can send millions of tons of snow crashing down, right? So I would use that as a metaphor of a bad habit, right? But what if you create an avalanche like you're suggesting, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, good, and it multiplies.
Right.
And you have that same thing, but you have a force that is useful.
Right.
So when we say hello to each other, we stop and we mean it. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? Like, peace. You know, grab that can of, get out of here, you know.
Right.
I don't mean it.
Right.
What if I stopped doing that?
Right.
Would that make somebody else's life and my own better? Right? And if I convince one person a month that that's better, and then they also have a conviction that they want to share with somebody else, you know, the original multiplications are very minute.
Right.
Right. They're not even they're additions.
It's like compounding interest, though, Mike.
Yeah.
And those little bits eventually mean something. Just like your example of 3 minutes a day,
right,
or a few paragraphs a day.
Right.
It doesn't seem like much in a week.
No.
Maybe not even in a month.
No.
But what about 5 years? What have you done?
Right.
It's the same thing.
So I guess I had a second idea for the next show, and that was that we split it between exercise and how we kill time. And I mean kill it, murder it, run it over, and waste it forever.
Right.
Not to put too hard.
I could probably benefit from that one.
Is that right?
I'm
I
sure.
think we all
I'm
could.
sure.
All right.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Very good.
Great wrap, episode 10, a recap of the first 9. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you'll share it with your friends. And until next time, we appreciate you joining Reclaiming Timeless Ways.